all for coming to Code Camp. Very honored today to have Lino talking about the history of Apple and how it relates to Steve Jobs. I think we all can agree that Steve was a major influence on Silicon Valley. And I feel a personal connection not to Steve, but just to the accomplishments that he's been able to bring about. And I think we all have models people to look to. Certainly he's one of my role models. Without really talking too much more, I'd really just like to introduce Lino. Lino's going to give a tour. He put this together in the last few days, so it's very much appreciated to come to Code Camp and be able to do a short tribute to Steve and what he's actually accomplished in the company that he brought the change to that.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
All right, I know this is usually a lot of fun in Code Camp, maybe a little bit not too happy time this morning, but again, I would like to make this not a sad moment, but reflection and actually having to remember the good days, what happened in this industry because of this significant man. So I'm not going to take probably the whole hour. I just wanted to go through some things. I asked actually my wife and kids to be here today, and my kids have never been to any of my talks for the last, been speaking for 25 years, but I thought it was important. I'm actually happy to see young kids actually in the room. I think it's important. The reason why I felt it was important to do this, I was sitting in the airport in Los Angeles coming back from the Adobe conference on Wednesday, and Peter called and says he wanted to change some things for some of the sessions and so on. And then 5 minutes later, I found out that Steve Jobs passed away. And I was sitting in the airport, and I just, for some reason, I actually started tearing. And I was like, wow. And I was expecting it, actually. I mean, all of us probably that saw him in the last couple of years probably expected he's going to come sooner or later. I actually saw Steve in Palo Alto about 40 days ago. 40 days ago, he was at Starbucks. He stopped his Mercedes in front of Starbucks, and he had his little girl with him. She was wearing soccer uniform, and they went to Starbucks. And I don't know the man personally. I've been listening to him. I saw him speaking several times, but personally, I thought he looked really fragile. He looked even thinner than last time we saw him on the stage. And I felt bad, so I parked my car, and I went in, and I just wanted to shake his hand and tell him thank you. And I actually wanted to pray for him. So I did, and he actually shook my hand, and he had a nice smile on his face. And now I remember this is like, I can't believe that I actually did that. I'm glad that I did before he passed away, that I actually went and shook his hand. So it was definitely a very significant thing that happened in my life. I will remember that. The reason why I really thought Peter should do a session like this is because for the last maybe couple of 100 years, in the future 200 years, this is a time that we will remember our kids and our grandkids. They need to know the story about what happened at this time. I think when this man passed away, and also when Bill Gates will pass away, hopefully after a long time, I mean, don't wish that on anybody, these people have actually changed our industry. I'm sure everybody in this room here has to do one way or another with computers, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be at Code Camp. And I think whether you're a Microsoft person or an Apple person or a Linux person, it doesn't really matter. This man has actually changed our life forever. And I think out of respect, I'd like to go through a few slides just to show you where he's coming from and hopefully be an inspiration to all of us for the future. First of all, he was born on February 21st, 1955. I already like him because of that, because I'm born in February too, so that's a good thing for Steve. He was born in San Francisco. Steve is a biologically he's actually as an Arab American. A lot of people didn't know that. He actually from Syrian roots, his biological parents. He was actually adopted as soon as he was born because his biological mom and dad had problems because the parents of his mom did not want him to marry the Arab from Syria. So they decided to actually give the kid for adoption. He was adopted by great parents, Paul and Clara Jobs. He loved them very, very much. They loved him back. And until the last day of his life, actually, he had a lot of appreciation for his parents. He never called them secondary parents. They were his parents, so he loved them dearly. He actually moved to Mountain View when he was 5 years old. So he lived here in the Bay Area most of his life. Maybe a few years he actually went to Oregon for school. I'll talk a lot about that later on. He has one biological sister, it's Mona Simpson. Is a very well-known author actually in New York. She is writing novels, and she's very, very successful as well. They met for the first time in 1986, so pretty much 30, 31 years have passed until they met personally, and since then they have had a very good relationship. And they actually fly between New York and Mountain View a lot to spend some time with each other. He also had a pretty good relationship at the end with his biological mother, but he never actually had any relationship or actually wanted to meet at all his biological father. This is my personal observation for Steve before I go into the history of things. First of all, Steve's methods of doing things were amazing. I run my own company, and I try to always learn from the best. So I look at who's successful in the world, try to do the same thing, or try to actually be inspired by that kind of stuff. So Steve, expert don't know much. If you have actually ever heard Steve talking in an informal way without media, he would tell you, experts like to give advice because they cannot do. Right? They just tell you how things should be done, but they never go do it because they don't know how to do it. So he was always against the word experts. He didn't like experts and people that say that we are advisors. Advisors is because you don't know how to go do it. Especially for Wall Street, people always tell you, like, if you want to make more money, this is what you should do. But they don't know how to actually do it themselves. So he always made fun of the Wall Street people that way. He said customers don't know what they want. I actually believe that very much. People say usually if you want to actually succeed in business, you have to listen to your customers. And I know that a lot of people need to do that. Steve never listens to his customers. Steve says, I'm always going to do something that customers don't know anything about. I'm going to actually shock them with the new stuff. And that worked for him. A lot of people will try this, it will not work for them because they don't have the innovation capability to actually create something significant in the world. He never thought of things based on how people would like to go from step A to step B. I remember, for instance, once he said something about Wayne Gretzky for hockey. He says, Wayne said that the reason why he's a great hockey player, Steve said that, is because he always anticipated where the ball is going to be, or the puck is going to be, not where the puck is right now. And that's why he became one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in that game. And that's what Steve did all his life. He always thought the design counts. I'm sure he definitely can definitely tell us all today that he was right. Design does count, right? For a lot of time, when I look, for instance, for Apple and for Microsoft, I always told myself, and I've been in the industry for about 25 years, Apple knows how to do things right, and Microsoft knows how to make money. So, based on that, I definitely find myself always trying to put food on the table, so I became a Microsoft person. But lately, for the last 5 or 6 years, obviously Steve proved to all of us that you can do things right and also make a lot of money. So he was actually very successful at the end with it. The most significant thing on this screen here, folks, is the next one. This affected my life very, very heavily. Steve always said, I heard him sing at least 4 or 5 times, A players hire A+ players. And I actually believe this very, very much. I noticed also that he said later on that B players hire C players. Yes. And C players hire D players. But A players hire A+ players. Let me explain what he meant by that. If you're not very good at what you do, you always want to be the top notch in your company. So you're always trying to hire people that are lower than you to actually feel superior. But if you're comfortable with who you are, you're always going to try to get the best of the best to work with you. And Steve always did that. He was not afraid. He was very comfortable with what he was trying to do. He always hired people that are smarter than him, which is not an easy thing to find. But he did that. I mean, his latest protege is Tim Cook. Tim is an extremely talented person. We'll leave that at the end if you don't mind. Absolutely. Thanks, man. So he left it in good hands, and he actually wrote a letter of resignation on August 11th, only 45 days ago, telling the board of directors that they really need to hire Tim Cook as the CEO because he's ready, and he's his protege for a lot of decades now to do this. The other thing that I actually learned from Steve also is that real CEOs demo and real CEOs ship. We are in a very different industry than anybody else. Like, you could be in the construction business, you could be in the movie business, you could be whatever, hardware business. Software business is very different, folks. You cannot get an extremely intelligent person that knows about accounting and business and sales and run a software company. I've looked around for all the companies out there, And the ones that actually go ahead and hire people like, this is a previous CEO of Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola or GE or whatever, bring them to like, well, if they were running multi-billion-dollar companies, they can run Apple or they can run Microsoft. And I actually don't believe in that. For software companies, can't do that. Because these people usually, when it comes time to show off the product, they want to bring up one of their VPs that know what's going on to demo the product because they're scared. I don't want people to think I'm an idiot. Steve never had that problem. Steve knew his product really well inside out. Same thing with Bill Gates. I remember both of them, they were impressive to sit down. How do you have the time during the day with all that business and Wall Street and analysts and all that stuff to understand how things are working on the chip level of your product? And they knew that. And that makes them very impressive, make them make right decisions for their company. Changing your mind is a sign of intelligence. A lot of people consider Steve to be an egomaniac and all that stuff, and there's a lot of stories about that, but the truth of the matter is he never had a problem changing his mind. People can actually change his mind, and it happened several times. The latest one is for the iPhone. iPhone, Steve said, no apps. I don't know if you remember this or not. Said that iPhone will not have an app store. We would not allow people to write apps because they can write apps that damage our phone, and they have no business with that. 6 months later, Tim Cook and other executives convinced him there should be an app store to open it up, and he changed his mind, and it was a good decision, and he actually admitted it was a good decision. The education of Steve, Steve actually attended Cupertino Junior High, which is about maybe 3 miles away from here, and then went to Homestead High School in Cupertino, California. So it just gave me chills to know that everything I'm going to tell you for the next maybe 10, 15 minutes happened in the 5-mile radius from where we are today. This is unbelievable. Following high school graduation in 1972, Steve enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and that was his stunt for a couple of years outside of California, going to Portland. And for a lot of people that are actually shocked, Steve is not a college graduate. He actually stayed in college for 6 months. He hated it. They would ask him to take these GE classes and history and English or whatever, and he hated all that stuff. He wanted to get technical. He wanted to do things that he liked. So this college thing was not for him. He hated it. He dropped out after 6 months. And after he hated it and moved out of the Reed College, he went back to Reed College not as a student, but he wanted to take some classes that he was interested in. Finally, he does not have to take these GE classes, things that bored him to death. One of the classes he took in 1972 was the calligraphy class. And it's amazing for us now, after all these years, to think about 40 years ago or so, the calligraphy class, this is where he learned the multiple typefaces and proportionally spaced font. And he fell in love with it. And this is so beautiful. I saw him once talking about his, how can he actually talk for half an hour on this typefaces and space fonts? I can talk about it for 30 seconds and there's nothing else to do. He can talk for hours on this stuff and he loves it. If he has not taken this class, folks, the first Mac in 1984 would not have had this built into it. And as he said in his commencement speech in 2005 for Stanford, if he hasn't done it, Windows 2 would not have stolen the idea and put it in Windows. The employment of Steve was actually amazing as well. Steve actually started his first job when he was very young at HP here in Cupertino, in Hewlett-Packard. And this is where he met Steve Wozniak for the first time. Steve was actually the more technical guy. So Steve was the, Steve Wozniak. So Steve Jobs always talked about him as the electronic hacker of the team. He loved to open circuits and do things. And actually Steve Jobs did not like to get down into soldering things and whatever. Wozniak loved to do that kind of stuff. He was the electronic hacker of the team between both of them. In 1974, folks, he took a job as a technician at Atari. Remember that company, folks? This is where we grew up on that, playing this stuff for my kids. This is the Nintendo, okay? All right. In 1974, after he started, he took a leave of absence for a little bit, and he actually went to India. And there, he actually became a Buddhist. And until today, when he died, actually last week, he was definitely from the Buddhist religion. Also, Steve returned to his previous job at Atari after he got back and was given the task of creating a circuit board for the game Breakout. Anybody remember the game Breakout on Atari? All right, so actually the CEO at the time of Atari told his employees here in the Valley, told them, if you guys can actually eliminate chips inside of the board, every time you eliminate one chip to make it smaller, I'll give you $100 for each chip. And people were able to take maybe 2 or 3 chips after several weeks of hard work. Steve Jobs got with Wozniak, and Wozniak did most of the work. Actually, even Steve Jobs said that they were able to take out 50 chips out of the board to make it small. Wozniak went to the point where he took so many chips that it was impossible to reproduce the board in manufacturing. It was just impossible to make things so close to each other like that. So actually, they didn't do it, but they still asked for the $5,000. How did Apple start? Apple started in 1976. Some of you I can see, probably my age as well. You can remember that this, we read about this all over the place. It was between Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne. They founded Apple. After that, they got some more money from a fourth person. And in 1978, Apple recruited Mike Scott from National Semiconductor. So they hired him from there. And that was the first time Steve Jobs started to learn from his mistakes. You cannot get somebody who's brilliant in a different industry and give them a company that does computers and software and so on. That didn't go very well. Actually, the company did not do very well at all under Mike Scott. So in 1983, after 4.5 years, Steve made one of the amazing decisions of his life, that he thought it was the best decision, then regretted it very much, and then he thought it was the best decision again. So during his life, the decision went back and forth. He actually hired John Scully, probably all of you heard the name, away from Pepsi-Cola. He thought, if I get this guy very, very famous and very rich, and he knows everybody, and he created an empire in Pepsi-Cola, I want him to run Apple as a CEO. So they hired Scully. On January 24th, 1984, with Scully on the top and Steve Jobs driving the new Macintosh, they released it in 1984, and it was very emotional. I don't know if you've seen the video of Steve in 1984 releasing here in San Francisco the first Macintosh. It was very emotional. He worked day and night, 22 hours a day for this to work, and it was successful. But the industry was not ready for that, and I'm sure everybody here remembers the stories that it was a great thing, but it was before its time. An industry-wide sales slump towards the end of 1984 caused a deterioration in the relationship between Scully and Steve Jobs. And he went to the board, Scully, and he got actually the guy that started Apple fired. He actually got Steve Jobs fired from the company. At the time, it was devastating. Steve used to say, like, I can't believe they are actually firing the guy that started the company. How can that possibly work? Well, that's called public companies. Public companies, once you go public, there is no such thing as owner or founder of the company. If they need to get you out, they can get you out. So he was fired. At the time, it was devastating. He was very sad about it. He took some time off to figure out what he wants to do. But later on, 10, 15 years later, he always talked about that, saying it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Because Apple was starting to get big. We're talking about $2 billion now between him and Wozniak going on. So he was limited to his freedom of innovation. So now when he was fired, he had some money. He had, in the millions, he had money. But he was able to think back as an entrepreneur, and he loved that time. He was able to actually come up with things that you cannot usually do when you're the head of a public company all the way at the top. So what did he do? He actually took some of that money he made. He went and started another company, which is Next Computers. Next Computers, he actually used $7 million from his own money to actually start this company. A year later, he ran out of money. Right? So when he ran out of money, Steve convinced Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot? He wanted to get some money. He invested heavily in Next. He gave Steve Jobs a lot of money to actually build the product, which was hardware products. The Next workstation were great, were really good. I mean, they look kind of ugly, but remember what's in the picture there, folks? This is the first server ever that was able to actually get called from outside. Actually, before anything else, this is a server on a PC scale without Unix and all of that would actually, before any Windows server came up, this is the first server that Next actually had working. They focused on education. They wanted to sell the stuff for education at university and so on. But the price tag was $9,999, $10,000. Didn't go very well. People are not going to spend at the time $10,000 to buy a workstation. So at the same year, they worked it out again and they revised the second generation. It's called Next Cube, if you remember the picture of that, and it was released also in 1990. In 1993, 3 years later, trying to sell the heck out of this thing, it was not really very successful. They only sold 50,000 machines. So what they decided in 1996 is like, okay, enough of that hardware stuff, let's turn Next into a software company. And that was the best decision, I think. I think that moment actually is the trigger for everything that came after that. So keep that in mind, folks, when you think about what happened in 1996, when they decided to actually make Next a software company, not a hardware company, and they came up with something called web objects. Anybody here heard of web objects? All right. So keep that in mind, because web objects, people usually don't hear about it, but it's still today, it's actually the basis of the App Store, of Mobile Me, On, and iTunes for Apple. It's all written in web objects. In 1997, Next was acquired by Apple again for over $480 million. At the time, that's not a lot of money for what we hear today in the billions, but this was the reunification of Steve Jobs coming back to this company for Apple. Let's talk a little bit about Pixar and Disney, which is really an amazing story. In 1986, Steve bought the graphics group. Later, he renamed it to Pixar. From Lucasfilm, he met with George Lucas, and he convinced him to sell him that small little part of the business that was not making a lot of money. He thought he could do something better with it, and he spent $10 million. So I want to take a look at the dates in here. So there is $7 million spent on Next, $10 million spent on the graphic groups. That's why he ran out of money, because he spent all his money trying to create all this entrepreneurship at the same time. Pixar was originally based in San Rafael, here in California, right across the bridge from San Francisco, but since moved to Emeryville. After years of nonprofit, because they were trying to work on hardware again for Pixar, they got into a contract with Disney that again proved to be a completely game changer for Apple and for Steve personally. They produced the first animated film, which is Toy Story, that's 100% done with computers. Brought fame and critical acclaim to the studio when it was released in 1995. It was an amazing film. Nobody could believe how it was actually made, and it was definitely Pixar started jumping 100 times forward. The following 15 years, folks, I'm sure everybody here knows the rest of the story. They came up after that with Bugs Life, Toy Story 2, Monster Inc., Finding Nemo, Toy Story 3, and a lot of them won Oscars here in the United States, which was amazing. That changed, of course, the whole idea behind Pixar. In 2003 and 2004, which is not too long ago, I mean, we're talking about dates, folks, in our lifetime. This is incredible. Steve had a major fallout with Michael Eisner. It's documented, it's all over the web. You can tell that they did not see eye to eye at all. They didn't like each other much whatsoever. And Michael Eisner from Disney decided to not renew the contract for Pixar, which was a major mistake. It got him fired actually a few years later, especially the board of directors of Disney, with Roy Disney on it, were all on Steve Jobs' side. So he got fired, and as soon as he got fired, Bob Iger in 2005 took the job at Disney, and the first thing he did on the first week is to call for Steve Jobs to come to Disney and apologize to him and try to make a deal. And the deal did not work very well either, but they were at least on talking conditions, and they were nice to each other. What happened later is Steve Jobs got what he wanted, which is a $7.4 billion for the price of Pixar. Not bad for a $10 million investment. And it was all in stock, which is even smarter on Steve Jobs, not to get the cash. $7.4 billion is definitely a lot of money, but he got it in stock. That makes Steve Jobs the #1 largest single shareholder at Disney till today, folks. Till today, he owns 7% of Disney. And when we talk about 7% of Disney, that is an amazing thing to talk about. Roy Disney owns 1% of the company. Michael Eisner owns currently less than 1% of the company, and that's in billions. And Steve Jobs, till today, owns 7% of the Disney stock. The return to Apple. In 1996, Apple announced that it would buy Next for $429 million. In 1997, Steve was announced interim chief executive of Apple. So it was back to normal. Steve in 1997 took the helm again and was able to say, let's go ahead and do this. Next step, by the way, the next step from Next, that's what ended up being the Mac OS X, the software piece. So you can see now how Next actually changed a lot of things in current Apple, okay? One of the biggest things that happened in the year 2000, folks, which is only 11 years ago, is that at Macworld Expo in 2000 here in Wisconsin, Steve dropped the interim from his title. He became the CEO of the company, and Apple was on its way to become one of the most powerful companies in the world, and this is what all the audience called them until today, CEO. So They returned to Apple with the introduction of iPod, portable music player, the iTunes digital music store, and the iTunes store. Apple achieved tremendous success, and I'm sure everybody in the room here knows where they are today because of all the stuff that they decided to do. On June 29, 2007, Apple entered the cellular phone business with the first iPhone. And that changed a lot of people's life. I mean, one of the things that was amazing to me is that I was in tears actually at the airport, and I was reading everything that's going on a few minutes after it was announced on my iPhone. And then I'm sitting in the airport, and you know all the seats are next to each other, and I'm looking at all the people around me, and they're all reading on their iPhones. And then all of us just brought the heads up like this and looking at each other without saying anything. They wanted to look at me and say like, did you hear the news? Until one of them broke the ice and said, did you hear the news? And everybody says, yes. Within 3 minutes, everybody in the airport on their iPhones, that changed our life. It couldn't have happened 10 years ago. It could have happened 6 years ago. It's just amazing that because of this man's innovation that this is how things travel now worldwide. I go to Europe a lot and Australia, and everybody on their iPhone, and the communication is unbelievable. Actually, I believe personally, because I'm also from a background of Middle East, that device and that man caused a lot of countries in the Middle East in the last year to actually change course just because of that device. It's just unbelievable. We have to talk a little bit about the health to understand where this man is coming from. In mid-2004, Steve actually was announced to all the employees of Apple that he's been diagnosed with a cancerous tumor in his pancreas. It's unfortunate because with all the money in the world, a lot of cancers can be treated. There's one cancer, I'm sure some of you here, especially living here next to Stanford, knows that the pancreatic cancer is one that unfortunately there's not much you can do about. But he was lucky. After they did some tests on him, they found out that the kind of cancer he had in the pancreas can be cured with an operation. He didn't want to do it. His Buddhist belief did not let him actually do this operation. So he waited for 6 months, and his family pushed him to do it. So after 6 months, he decided to do the operation, and the operation was successful. And he came out after that the following year here in Stanford. We did the commencement speech. He told them that I'm free of cancer now, and I hope to live another 2 or 3 decades. And he was full of life at the time. He was very happy to do that. That operation was called the Whipple procedure, which is to go in and take that piece of the tumor completely, and it's known for that kind of disease for the pancreatic cancer, that it can be cured, not the bad one, which was great for him at the time. In mid-2009, he received a liver transplant. A lot of people on the news say that Steve died last week because of pancreatic cancer. I actually am not a doctor, but based on so much stuff that I've read and talked to people that knew him, I will tell you that it's a cause, but it was not a direct cause. I mean, I think the pancreatic cancer was gone, but it was causing so much damage when it was there for the liver and after the transplant that he could not get back to normal. So the cancer was gone, but he already made his damage. So it's the liver transplant and what it did to his immune system that actually probably took it down. Jobs announced his resignation from the role of Apple CEO on August 24th. Folks, this is 40 days ago. He sent a letter to the board telling them it's done. I want to share with you some of his accomplishments, which is unbelievable. Steve Jobs has his name on 338 US patents. In 1982, Time magazine called him Let's read this one. enough stuff for like 5 or 6 people in a lifetime. Huh? The good news is the end was peaceful. He died at home last week. He has a wonderful wife for 20 years, 3 children, and a post-child from a previous relationship. And I believe all of us are very lucky to have lived in the same time, the same area as him for our lives in here. Thank you, Steve. Rest in peace. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to stand up for a moment of silence for this. Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate it.